This is Mod 8, supply and demand and price controls, ceilings and floors. So today, everything we've learned about is going to kind of get thrown out the window. When you look at something like supply and demand is awesome because it's efficient, and all economists will agree that like when we look at things that are efficient, we're going to where those lines cross and we're finding that equilibrium points, and everybody is in love with supply and demand, right? It's like perfect. But there are some people who are not in love with supply and demand, and those people have a problem with something that's happening. So, for example, let's say someone feels the price is too high, even when market forces are in effect. You can fix that by government intervention, which is not something that we want to do all the time, right? But if you feel like, oh man, this really is a problem for society, you can do something called a price control. And a price control, right here by definition, it's that legal restriction of how high or low a price can go for a particular item. They're enacted by the government, and what's going to happen is it messes with our supply and demand. So can't get to equilibrium because something else is going to happen. So as you look at price ceilings, those are going to be the first ones we look at. The very first thing you have to do is you have to draw yourself a supply and demand graph, right? So we're just going to draw a little supply and demand graph here. So we got here's my axes, here's my price right here, here's my quantity over here. Okay. Now if I look at that, I can have a little supply line coming up like this. And I can have my demand curve coming down like this. All right, so there's my supply and demand. Now, you know from supply and demand that this point right here is going to be my equilibrium point. So here's my price at equilibrium. Here is my quantity at equilibrium. So now, let's say that that price at equilibrium is just too high for some group of people. A disadvantaged group, a group that doesn't have whatever this is or deems this too expensive. We can put a price restriction on it, and that price restriction would be a price ceiling. If you put it below equilibrium, down here, that is considered binding. So this binding just means it's working. So this is a binding price ceiling. Anything set above equilibrium up here, it's almost like it's like a trick question, because what will happen is people will come down to the equilibrium point for price, all right? Because if it's set too high, nobody's going to pay that price. They're going to come down and get the lower price. But if it's set low enough, just like this one is, then all of a sudden it's in effect. That's as high as the price can go, and this is a price that's set by the government, all right? So who might do this and why? Let's say it's like cell phones, right? We used to have things like payphones where you could just put a couple quarters in and call somebody, right? If you had a problem, etc. They'd be a side of the road by a gas station, something like that. Well, now we've kind of taken all that stuff away, and everybody has a cell phone. Well, what if you don't have enough money to buy a cell phone? Well, if you can argue to the government like, hey, I don't have enough money to get a cell phone, you've taken away all my options here, like the payphones, etc. Help me out. So the government says, you know what, that's a great idea. We're going to give you a cell phone at a reduced rate. And then what starts to happen is we're going to get our price crossing suppliers here. So this is my quantity supplied, but there's a lot of people that want this item out here. So I got a new line crossing, and this is my quantity demanded. Well, normally at equilibrium, those two things equal each other, and we get price, and it's awesome, and we get quantity, and it's awesome. Well, here what I'm looking at is my demand is more than my supply. I end up with a shortage down here. And a lot of, like, some negative things can happen, right? I could get people that don't really need, let's say it's a cell phone, and they go get it anyway. And then what they're trying to do is resell it up here at a higher price. I have people here who are supplying, but they don't want, not making any money at it, so they're going to supply less quantity down here. And so now I have this big old gap between some people are getting it, and then they're going to do something like resell it. The people that really need it might not be able to because there's a shortage, and then it's just causing all sorts of problems. So that is a binding price ceiling. That's how it works. it can go into effect, but it would help out a consumer that is looking for something maybe to be a little bit cheaper than what it is when market forces are applied. So here is my supply and demand, there's my price ceiling, there's my shortage on a little graph right there. You can see it's exactly what we drew down below. Is it inefficient? Yes. And probably the most interesting thing in here is this black market idea. And the black market just simply means that somebody's going to probably get this phone or get this item, whatever it might be, and then resell it at a higher rate because they know some people are willing to pay higher prices for it. So we end up with lots of problems. Why are there price ceilings? Well, they do benefit some people. Some of the time, I think it's just uncertainty. Like we don't really know how they work, and we've always kind of had them. So then we do things, and they kind of feel good, maybe, especially to a politician who has a bunch of people in his district who or her district who might say, you know what, I really need this, and then it benefits those people in that, politically. I do think there's probably some lack of understanding of how they actually work and what they do and why they might cause some problems. That's also out there. Price floors. Price floors are going to be, I don't want to say the opposite, but they're going to help out sort of in the opposite way. So instead of helping out a consumer now, what we're doing is we're going to help out a producer. So we still have our price and we still have our quantity. We're going to have a supply curve. We're going to have a demand curve. We're going to have price at equilibrium, quantity at equilibrium. But this time, it's a producer out there who can't get enough price for their good. So in this case, maybe the example is maybe it's a farmer who can't get a price on their milk, right? They're like, hey, at this price and quantity, the family farm is going out of business because we just cannot get the price that we need. So they go to their government official, their politician, their elected office, and they're going to say, hey, help me out. And the politician's going to say, you know what, we can help you out. What we'll do is we'll just raise the price on milk, and people will pay more for it, and then you'll have more money. And the farmer's going to be like, thank you. Finally, someone is listening. Let's help out, the family farmer out here. So we decided to put a price on. And again, up here this time, this is going to be working. So it's going to be a binding price floor. All right. Now, this binding price floor is the government price that they put in place up here. And the government price is going to have some problems because this time our suppliers are happy, right? I'm supplying out here. I'm going to supply more stuff. I'm going to have quantities supplied here. But my demanders are not so happy. They're going to say, I don't want this item at that particular price. And then up here, what we end up with is a surplus. Now, sometimes what happens, especially with something like agricultural products, etc., if we end up with this surplus up here, what might happen is the producer will still make it. So I'm still going to milk the cows, right? And even though the demanders don't want it, I have to make it because this is the price that we're setting up here. And then you get to see people like dumping milk. Sometimes you'll see that. They'll milk the cows. They don't know what to do. They have the milk. And so they'll just dump it in a field someplace, or they'll mix it in with some food for some other animals or whatever it might be, but they just get rid of it. Other times what you'll see is someone buy up the surplus. And oftentimes it'll be the government that steps in and then buys up the surplus. So if I'm the government, I buy up a bunch of milk, what am I going to do with it? Well, I know, I'll give it to the school because the school kids would need some milk. I get to them at a reduced rate. And since governments are involved in schools and governments are involved in this surplus of milk, it works together, and then you'll do something like that. So when you think about buying up the surplus, it's kind of tough because the government's the one that did it in the first place, and now the government's going to fix the problem that they created. Is that worth going through all the hassle to help out the person that needs it? And the answer in terms of farming is probably yes, because once that farm is gone, it's gone, right? It's not like, oh, it went out of business and then, oh, it's coming back. That doesn't typically happen. Once the farmer leaves, they're probably gone for good, which is sad. So to keep those farms around, you probably need to do it. But at the same time, there's a lot of other things that are happening here that are going to cause problems, right? And then you're going to have to deal with those too. So modeling a price floor, there's our price floor. You can see the surplus right in there, just like what we drew. Is it inefficient? For sure. You're going to end up with probably wasted resources and a higher quality than you really need. You're also going to get some a black market. In this case, if this was labor, for example, if I know that, like let's say this wasn't milk for as an example, but it was a minimum wage. If this price would, if this is the equilibrium price for like $8 an hour, and all of a sudden the government puts in $15 an hour, there's going to be more people who are willing to work for $15 an hour, but no one's going to hire them. There's no demand for that labor. So then what happens? You're going to pay some people $15 an hour, but you're going to fire other people. Well, some of those people are willing to work for $8 an hour, and then what's going to start happening is they're going to show up to work and they're just going to get paid cash by somebody under the table. There's going to be no taxes taken out of that. It becomes this huge problem for a black market for labor, when maybe if you just let the market forces set it, then you wouldn't have to deal with some of those issues, right? Why are there price floors? Again, it does help out some producers. But again, those people can sometimes manipulate their politicians to make it out better for them. Sometimes it's just blatant disregard, like they just don't care. The politicians in that case, they know that they're getting money from some industry, so they're willing to take that cash, and people don't pay attention to how much they pay for like some particular good, like agricultural products, for example. As long as it's not too expensive, they don't really mind. And again, there's not a ton of politicians that are econ majors. There might be some, but they might not really understand how it works. All they know is, if I do this, it makes my constituents happy, it makes the people that donate to my campaign happy, so therefore we're going to do it, even though in terms of like economics, it's probably not the wisest of choices. All right? So those are some surpluses and shortages created through price floors and price ceilings. We'll get into examples like the one you got here in your notes, and hopefully it helps clear it up a little bit for you. Thanks.